What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we are going to be doing input remapping and or changing your controls on the fly, stuff like that. So this is going to be strictly Blueprint only, but it's going to be very easy to transfer from code to Blueprint or Blueprint to code because we are strictly using some things that Unreal has set up to implement this. We don't have to implement too much on our own, so we'll get into it today, but yeah. So this is about it. This is how it works. I press a button to open up an options menu. Then I can select the button. Currently this is with the mouse. We will go over some more HUD and widget stuff to actually make it more accessible for controllers and things like that. But for now, this is with the mouse. So you bring up the options menu. You can click on a button. I can select a button. And now I can rebind my controls. So now I jump with W. If I want, I can switch it to 2. Now I jump with 2. And when I press W, nothing happens. Okay? And you can do this for all your attacks. Theoretically, both players would have their own options menu, or rather, they would get ownership of the options menu when they are the one to pause it, unless you could switch between whose controls were getting changed. Again, we'll get into that later when we do more specific widget and blueprint stuff like that. But this is a very simple way. This is literally all we're going to be doing today, this and this, to rebind your controls on the fly, or in general. It doesn't have to be on the fly. You can use this to actually rebind your controls in the editor, as you see. If you go to input now, these keys, and I know you didn't know what they were before, but they are actually changed to the keys that we put in the game. So this also kind of saves out their presets for you. So you don't have to do any sort of like input-output reading or writing for this, for them to save their controls between multiple sessions. Okay, so to get started, we are going to have a way to open up an options menu, as well as we're going to need to create an options menu. So I had, and I just closed the window, but I have a key called open pause menu, and it is the P key for right now. P for pause. So if you add that action mapping and then go into your mutant character BP, and if you haven't been following this tutorial series and you're just interested in action mappings, then just know you can do this anywhere. It doesn't have to be like this specific character or whatever, just anywhere where you can grab input. So preferably a character, player controller, or even a level blueprint. It's possible to do that in, but probably the character or the player controller would be the best option here. If you are interested in watching the series and you're new to it, here's an iCard in the top right corner for the first episode of this series. Okay. So let's get on with it. When you put an action mapping in your input settings that we were just in, you can type in the name of that for anything, and it'll come up under action events. So open pause menu, and that's what this is here. So click that just to show you, like if I were to do jump P2, I can also do this here. And we've done that, in fact, just the previous episode in the series. So you guys will be familiar with that. So all we're going to do is create our widget, our change control screen widget, and then add it to the viewport. So if you haven't made any sort of options menu or like control changing screen, just go ahead and go to wherever you want to make it, add new, add new, go all the way down to the bottom. Now, due to the way I record, I've never been able to actually properly show off how to make a widget because the window is too long, but go all the way down to the bottom of this thing. So you see paper 2Ds at the bottom, go all the way down, 3 more down, you'll reach user interface, and then you see font, slate brush, slate widget style. Widget blueprint is the bottom one. Click widget blueprint, You'll come up with a blank thing like this. And then I just added some text. This is a text box, or these are all text, just literally text. So if you want to spice it up a bit, spice it up however. But I've put 6 text in, so 1 for the title, 1 for each of the names of the controls. And then these are what's called, I believe they're called input key selectors. Let me see. Yep, input key selector. Want to make sure that was the proper name. So an input key selector does It's an Unreal component, and you can customize it and make it look nicer than this, so don't worry about that. But it's essentially an input that does allow for you to determine what key has been pressed. So it's perfect for this. Basically, is once it has been activated, so either you press enter or some button that you set as the confirm button in Unreal, when you have this button selected, or if you click on it with the mouse, you will activate the button, and then it searches for input, and the next input that the owning player of the widget gives, that's why I said we could make player 1 or player 2 be the owner of the widget, will then it will return the value of the key that we pressed. It will return the value of whatever's in this box, essentially. So basically, you have empty by default, because, you know, we're not either an owner of this widget right now, or are we pressing any buttons. But when you're in game, it will return whatever you tell it to select, and then when it has been confirmed by pressing whatever the buttons mentioned earlier, then when they press the following key will fill in the text. And you can set specific text, like here, key selection text. It doesn't have to be the letter. And no key specified, it doesn't have to be empty. It can be whatever you want. But without touching it, that's how it will look. So just add these, one for each of your bindings. Jump, attack 1, attack 2, attack 3, attack 4, in my case. Okay, so when you're here, you don't actually have to bind anything like you would with a text box or something like that. But what you can do is go all the way down to the bottom, click on Events, and View, or Add, because this will be a little plus sign if you haven't done it before, on key selected. And this means this is the logic that will occur when this value has been confirmed. So when I have entered W as my input on this box. That's all you need to do. I would recommend doing it for all of them. You could technically avoid this and not wait for the key to be selected, but I don't recommend it. So I would just look at on key selected. Now we go to our graph. And this is going to be the last of it already. So this one should be a bit shorter than normal. So I will say this stuff is a bit more complicated though, because a lot of us haven't touched it before. So it's going to be kind of some weird stuff. So I'll go in depth in explaining everything that's going on here. Now don't worry about remap controls button. That's something I'm working on separate from this, so ignore that for now. But these bindings, the jump binding and all the attack bindings, they come over due to the input key selector. So these things we made here, as long as isVariable is checked, you'll have the variables for them. So I did not make these, and you don't have to. Just make sure isVariable stays checked. Input action mappings, however, I did make. So I'd recommend making this. When you look at this, this is actually a input action key mapping. So if you click on this, input action key mapping, it is this guy right here. And I made it an array. So to do that, you go over here next to the variable type in the details panel, click the actual symbol. Normally it'll look like this pill shape. You click like this 3x3 grid, and that's an array. So we're making an array because this is going to hold all of our input action mappings. This is important because we're going to loop through them to actually determine what all the key states are. That way we can display them on the options screen. Now that you've made your variables and you have your other ones here, we can get started on the actual logic. On event construct, so basically when this widget is first made, we're going to do a few things here. We're going to get input settings, which is literally get input settings right here. And then off of that, get action names right here. And what this does is this returns all the names of all the actions that we have. So jump P1, jump P2, attack 1, P1, all those that we had shown earlier. We're going to loop through them, okay? And we're going to get action mapping by name. So then we just put in our action names array element into our get action mapping by name. And what this does is this returns all the input actions. So this will return an input action, and as it's called here, in input action key mapping is essentially the input action. So it's the name. It's also the key. So this is a structure. So for example, jump P1 is the name that's involved in this. and the key by default is W. So then there's a key in here. There's also some other things, like if you are to look in here, you'll see that they have like Shift, Control, Alt, or Command. If any of these buttons have to be pressed in relation or alongside this button to make this functionality happen, that's all also included in an input action key mapping struct. Okay, so that's what we're doing. We're getting the names of all the action mappings, which is just jump P1, attack 1, P1, all that stuff. Then we're getting the actual action mapping, which is the key and the rest of the data, from the name. We're going to get 0 because what I'm doing is just grabbing the first key. The reason we're doing this is because you can have multiple keys. In fact, you should if you plan on using multiple devices. Do this one more time. I know I keep closing it. Like I can have up here, but then I could also have gamepad, left thumbstick, y-axis. We only want to grab the first one. That's 0. So I'm going to get rid of that because, you know, I'm still playing around with this stuff. But you will have multiple controls, so we only want to grab the first one and display that to the screen. You could grab all of them and display them in different boxes or display them as pictures or even just raw text, whatever you want to do. I decided to just grab the first one so that we can add it to the input action mappings list. That way we can display them here in a second. Now, once everything has been added to the input action mappings array here, once this loop is completed, we continue on. Then we loop through this input action mappings array. We break the current action mapping we're on, which as I said has the name, all these extra booleans, and the key itself. Then we just do a switch on the name for the... So when you do a switch on a string or on a name, like literally you just type switch. I know I interrupted myself, but switch on name. When you add a pin, it is case 0. You can right click on the pin, or sorry, I thought you could right click on it, but I guess you just you just left click on the switch statement, and then you can edit the cases here. You can also get rid of like the default pin. There you go. So these are the cases I want to account for. You can always add more later. But basically, if the name is jump, if the name is attack, then I want to set these keys. I'm setting the input key selectors. So let me back up a bit and kind of explain what that is. So the input action mappings, remember, is the entire structure. It's the name, the key, and all the additional booleans. We break it. We just grab the name. And once we grab the name, we say, okay, let's use our input selectors. That's what these are, remember. Jump binding. Set selected key. So you drag off of any of your input key selectors, type in set selected key. It's this one right here. And what this means is the key has been selected. So it's kind of like you're forcing the key input selector, or the input key selector, to be that value, right? This is important because if you don't do this, they will all show up as empty when you open up this pause menu. In fact, I can show you. So here, if I don't do this, you can see jump says empty. Now I can still jump. I do forget what the control is right now because I have switched it. There we go. I can still jump, but the actual input key selector will say empty because we are not assigning it off the bat. So that could be fine depending on what you want. I think it looks much better to have the currently assigned key have the value in the options menu already. That's the reason I've done this. So it's literally the same logic. Just make sure you're searching for the right name that you have your action mapping set to, and you set your selected key for each of these. The other important part of this is this bottom part. So see how we broke it down below to grab the action name? Technically, you should use the same one, really. Like, I should have used the same one. But I just broke this out so it would be easier to understand, okay? So these are the same thing. I'm breaking the same structure. But the set selected key requires an in selected key. This in selected key is an input chord structure, which, to be honest, I don't entirely know what it means. It basically means everything except everything in the input action, but not the name. So I'm not entirely sure why these are separate anyway. I feel like it should be all related, but regardless, it doesn't really matter. The important part here is you need to transfer in all the data from your input key mapping input action key mapping other than the name. So honestly, what I was trying to say earlier, I thought this was going to make it easier, but I think I made it a bit more confusing, so I'm just going to do it like this. So you just transfer all this data over. If any of these keys are needed to be pressed, and then also the key itself. And then when you pass these into the set selected key, well, these now have the value that it currently is. It's basically this on construct is basically reading what your values are set to by default and then putting them out to the input key selectors. That way it tells you what keys are necessary to be pressed to activate that control. That's the first part of it. Now the last part is we're going to be binding a new key. So remember, we can set selected key like we've done here, and that's forcing it to be a selected key. However, on key selected is different. On key selected is when a button actually has been switched around. So on key selected fires when I play this, when I click this, and when I press W, that calls on key selected. So now that I've pressed this, we're going to go through this logic. I've made a new function called bind new key. Just press the little plus here, make a new function. Then make sure you compile so you can actually edit your inputs. Go over to your right side here in your details panel or wherever it's located. Add two parameters right here. One be an input chord and one be the action mapping name. Again, you could actually make this an action mapping input and just break it. Either way, it doesn't matter. I find this to be easier. So input key and action mapping name as my variables. There you go. That way you can see it. And the reason I made this a function is the logic is the same for binding every single control except for the name you're looking for. So this would get very ugly very quickly if you had to do this logic on all of these. And there's a lot of games with a lot more controls than 5. So, okay. We'll go through what is inside the function, and then we'll go through what we need to do, what we need to put in these boxes on the outside. So inside the bind new key function, what we're doing, and this one's a bit ugly, I'll admit. I fought with this for a while, so I apologize. I tried to get it as nice as possible for you guys, but it was not as easy as I would have expected. So, in the bind new key, we're going to start out by grabbing our input action mappings array. Remember, we set this earlier on construct. We're going to loop through it and break. So we're going through all of our input action mappings. So our jump P1, jump P2, attack 1, P1, all that stuff. We're grabbing the name. We're checking if the name is equal to the name that has been entered in the function. So you see for jump, I'm looking for jump P1. For attack 1, I'm looking for attack 1, P1, and so on and so on. So if these are the same, if the action mapping we're on has the same name as the name we entered, this is the entry we're looking for. So then we can continue on. We want to loop through. Okay, so we're going to get our input settings again and get action mapping by name. The reason we're breaking this up a bit, and we're going to use our name that we entered as the action mapping by name. The reason we're breaking this up instead of using the input action key mapping. So when you get action mapping by name, it returns an array of values. Now, these values are all of the input action key mappings that are tied to that certain action mapping, okay? And what I mean by that is this will store all the keys that are tied to that one button. Okay, that's important because if you were to, instead of throwing this in for this next part, throw in your input action mappings array, you would actually delete your entire action mapping list. So what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be removing the action mappings when we go to rebind these. So that way we can't have 80 controls all bound to the same thing. Just make sure you're doing it this way instead of using the input action mappings array we have. Remember, this is all the input action mappings that we have for our game. This looks for a specific name and grabs all the keys relevant to it. So, since we put in jump P1, it's going to look at jump P1, get all the action mappings we have. Then, it's going to loop through them. It's going to remove the action mappings for everyone that exists. So, if we had W, up, and U were all ways to jump, then it would remove all of them. Okay? Then, when it's completed, we're going to do this crazy thing called break. So this is a for each loop with break. It's literally a different node. So you just click this and it has a break node on the end here. Now, this is a pretty ugly way to do it, I'm not going to lie, but this is the nicest way I know how without using custom events to do it, which you can't do in functions. It's a long story. But when the array to remove everything from the input action mapping is completed, we're going to break out of the loop that is looping through the input action mappings, right? Because we don't need to do that anymore. We should only have one input action mapping that is named jump P1. We've found that. We've cleared everything out. Now we need to fill in the new value that we want to use. So when this is completed, the input key that we originally put in when this function is called, which is the selected key, on key selected, see, it's the selected key, we break that because it's a structure, so we break it, and you can, and you probably should do all this. I didn't, but there's really no reason not to. It's just I don't happen to be using any of these additional values at the time, so I don't need the booleans connected, but you might as well in case you decide to in the future. So, what we want to do is break this, make a new input action key mapping. So it's literally make input action key mapping right here. Put everything in from the key we pressed into this action mapping and put in the action mapping's name right here as the name that we passed into the function. So essentially what we're doing is we're removing the old action mapping, old jump P1, and we're making a new jump P1. Once this is made, then we go ahead and do add action mapping with the new input action key mapping we have. This will ensure that we have jump P1 in our list. I know that was a mouthful, but that's how that works. Basically, in short, remove the old action mapping, including all of the keys that it entails, add a new action key mapping with the name and the key that the player presses, and then add it to the list. Then just set all your names to be the names of the action mapping that you want to use. Now, to show you in real time what it actually looks like, because I think this will help, if we go into input, okay. Sorry guys, so my editor crashed after what I was doing, so I just went ahead and cut that part out. But anyway, so if you go into your input, I'll show you what's happening in real time. So you see I have jump P1 at the bottom, which is W. If I leave this window open, and you can still see it below here, right? I'll move this up a bit. Alright, so when I pause my game, you see jump does display as W. If I press S, jump P1 was actually deleted and added back to S. And we'll show this again. So attack 1. Okay, hold on. Where attack 1 P1 is G right here, right? Attack 1 P1 is G. You can see it. I'm going to move it up here. Give me 1 second. I'll make this a bit smaller. Okay. Attack 1 P1 is G. If I change this is G, to 6, you see it goes to the bottom and it is no longer where it was. It actually removes the input action mapping and adds a new one with the same name and a different key. And that's how it's working in real time. So alright guys, there you go. If you followed this tutorial, that's how you'll know, A, how to actually rebind your controls on the spot, but also, and possibly more importantly, not add like 80 controls to the same input action key mapping when you're switching them and when you're rebinding them. Now, you can definitely want more than one, like I mentioned earlier with the joystick. Like you might want to have a gamepad joystick, or an x-axis or something like that, and that's unrelated to the key that you want to use, and you don't necessarily want to clear that out. We can get into how to fix that issue in another episode, so don't worry, I didn't forget about it. It is possible to fix, and it is something that you handle, but for now, it's good to clear out all of those so you don't switch your keys a bunch of times and then have like 80 keys that can make you jump. Alright guys, so anyway, that's going to be it for this episode. Thank you so much for watching. If I helped you out, or if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe. It's the best thing you can do for this channel. It really helps me out, and it lets me know what kind of interested. Okay. Anyway, guys, that's it. So thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe. It helps me out more than anything else you can do for the channel, and even more importantly, it helps me know what videos you guys are interested in and what videos you guys want to see more of. So if you did have any issues or would like to have any of your questions answered or any sort of advice, feel free to join the Discord. We have over 90 members, and there's tons of people in there willing to help you, including myself, and I can also help you with pictures and videos as opposed to just text. But if Discord's not your thing, feel free to leave a YouTube comment. I will answer all of them. And yeah, so that's about it, guys. The very last thing I want to say is if you want to join us on Twitch, Shawnthebro27 on Twitch. Someone took my name. It is what it is. But anyway, Shawnthebro27 on Twitch. We do Dark Souls Wednesday, Resident Evil Friday. If you're interested in coming by and hanging out with us, I'd be so happy to have you. We have a great time doing different challenges and things like that. But, you know, just figured I'd throw that out there. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next episode where we do the Fighting Game Camera Part 2. So anyway, guys, I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one.